Would you like to know the secret to building wealth? Who wouldn't, right? Okay, so here we go. Are you ready? You got to go out and earn some money. By the way, inheriting, we're not going to talk about inheriting. So earn some money. And then, of course, you're going to spend part of that money. And what is left is called your savings. And you're going to take that savings and you're going to invest it. Okay, let's talk about each one of these things. By the way, how can I have the absolute most wealth? Well, is maximize savings. So how do I maximize savings? There are two ways.
Earn more or spend less.
Yeah, earn more or spend less. So let's talk about my favorite. I always would prefer to earn more, right? And so how do you earn more? Well, first of all, you need to be willing to move. People who are not willing to move for a job don't make as much money. And I moved 13 times before I wound up here, and I never moved without a pay raise. So being willing to move and also being willing to change organizations. It's strange how your current organization never values you as much as the next organization. So be willing to move locations, be willing to change organizations. Now, what about spending? That's something you're going to have to figure out on your own. But I will tell you this. If, when you get your first job out of here, you start immediately contributing to the 401k, and hopefully your employer is going to match that too. Here's the trick. Right now, you guys are probably making somewhere between jack and squat. And you're going to suddenly get this job that's paying around $60,000 a year. And if you immediately start saving part of that, you're never going to miss it. Does that make sense? And then whenever you get a raise, increase your savings, in your pre-tax savings appropriately, and you'll never miss that money. As opposed to people, and I know people like this, they get out and they spend every penny they make for the first 5 years, and then they say, oh, wait a minute, I'll catch up on it later. But what they've done is they've gotten themselves into the habit of having this nice lifestyle, and suddenly they're back to having to fly economy class. If you never left economy class, you'll never know how good business class was. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's how you keep your spending down, is you never start down that road. So then you've got your savings, and then the question becomes, what do you invest in? Any ideas?
S&P 500.
S&P 500, it's so easy. This is a piece of advice that I can give you that I know 30 years from now you're not going to come back and give me trouble. By the way, that's the ticker symbol for the ETF for the S&P 500 is SPY. So I was talking to this is the first time I've ever talked to a wealth advisor about my stuff. And he says, wow, he says, you've done quite well. I said, thank you. And he says, I see you're invested basically 100% S&P 500. And I said, yes. And then he says, well, isn't that a little, and of course, part of it's my age, right? I'm 54. He says, that's a little risky. I'm like, yeah, that's why I've done so well, right? Because I'm willing to take the risk. But I'm diversified, right? I mean, I've still got equity risk, but I don't have the individual risk of the independent stocks. So if you remember nothing else, invest in the S&P 500 and you should be, statistically you should be fine. Questions?
Did you learn anything from the wealth advisor?
I did.
Did he tell you anything you didn't?
I did, and it was interesting because I was thinking I should start doing what are called backdoor Roth conversions. Hopefully you guys have heard of those. And the reason is my pre-tax accounts are pretty big because of what I've been doing all these years. And so I didn't want, and he told me, he says, well, what do you guys want to do with your money when you're dead? And I said, well, we're going to give a set amount to these certain people, but the great majority of it is going to go to charity. He said, don't do the backdoor Roths. He said, when you die and you leave your money to the charity, they're not going to have to pay taxes on it. He said, you've never had to pay taxes on it. They'll never have to pay taxes on it. That money will never get taxed. That was the most beautiful thing anybody had said to me all week long, maybe all month. So that was one of the things that I learned. The other was long-term care insurance. I don't know, you guys probably don't contemplate getting old, but one of the things that we do here in the U.S. is that we put our old people in these nursing homes. And every old person really, really, really wants to avoid going to the nursing home. But we know it's a possibility, so they have this stuff called long-term care insurance. And one of the things that he said was, given the size of my nest egg versus my spending habits, which are modest, he said, I don't think you would not be able to afford to pay cash for that. He says, besides, he said, people typically only end up in long-term care for 3 years or less, and then he put a number to it, and it all made sense. So those were the two big things that I took away from it. If you save well earlier in your life, you don't have to worry about paying for the long-term care insurance. And he says, by the way, it's not as good as it used to be anyway, so it's probably not going to cover everything. It's just going to give you a monthly amount to go toward it. Good question. Other questions? Okay. So let's talk about Chapter 8. Talking about making capital investment decisions. So far, we did Chapter 12, which was about finding the appropriate rate given the risk of the project. And then we looked at Chapter 7, and Chapter 7 gave us different decision criteria. And which one did we say was the one that we're going to use the most often? And NPV is the gold standard, right? And we said every time we do NPV, we're also going to do IRR, because they take exactly the same stuff and they're both useful. Now the question becomes, what are we going to then discount with that rate that we came up with? And it turns out it's called CFFA, or cash flow from assets. Cash flow from assets. And so all the stuff that we're going to talk about is leading up to getting to that cash flow from assets. And we're going to have cash flow from assets for every year of the project, including time zero. And then we're going to discount those cash flows at a rate appropriate to the risk to get to our NPV. But first, let's start talking about what kind of cash flows are we going to use. Well, first of all, we're going to use real cash flows. Are accounting numbers from the income statement actual cash flows? No. So you've got depreciation as an expense on the income statement. Is it a cash expense? No. You've also got stuff that you've sold that is still, you are owed money on accounts receivable. You've got stuff that you've bought. You didn't pay cash for it. Instead, you've got accounts payable. So there's all sorts of junk in that income statement that is not cash. So we're probably, most likely, we're going to come at this through the indirect way, and that is to start with net income and then work our way backward from that. Or we can work at it a different way and get to operating cash flow using EBIT, adding back depreciation and subtracting taxes. Okay, but we'll get to that. Now, let's see. So basically, when you look at net income, it looks like all the sales that you got, if you were to take that number as cash, you would think that all the sales you got were in cash. You would think that all the stuff that you bought, cost of goods sold, was paid in cash. And you would also think that depreciation was a cash expense. And none of those things are true. Any questions so far? So what kinds of cash flows are we going to be looking at in our NPV analysis? We're going to look at incremental cash flows. Incremental is only the amount that is going to be changed as a result of taking on the project. So one of the things that we see when people are looking at mergers and acquisitions is that they look at the total amount. So they say, oh, well, our net income is going to go up by $30 million as a result of, or because this other company has $30 million worth of net income. But you paid for that. So there's a lot of, you got to be careful here not to assume that everything that is associated with this is going to be incremental. So let's give some examples. First of all, if we've got cash flows that are going to change as a result of taking on the project, they are included. If it's going to occur regardless of the decision that we make, they are not included. And then we've got the trickiest one of all, cash flows that could happen if you didn't take on the project. We'll dig into more how to determine those. But the big question is this, ask yourself, is this cash flow going to be different as a result of taking on the project? If it is, the difference is the incremental cash flow, not the overall total number, the difference. So let's talk about sunk costs. So a sunk cost is money that you've already spent or that you are obligated to spend regardless of the decision you make. So you guys may have paid cash for your degree, and then you get confronted with a decision as to whether to go into finance or to follow your dream job with the traveling circus. I don't know what, let's assume that you're an acrobat of some variety. So you're going to be an acrobat with a circus. It's going to pay you exactly the same that your finance job would pay you. It's going to offer you the same opportunities for promotion. Someday you could be ringmaster, right? All that kind of stuff. Now, when you are making the decision whether or not to pursue your dream job of running away with a circus, should you consider that money that you spent on your finance degree? No. Regardless of what you do, you can't get that money back. Now, sometimes students say, well, wait a minute, what about student loans? That's money going out into the future, so surely I would need to include that. It's not incremental to the project. Whether or not you run off with the circus, you're going to have to make those payments either way. So either way, whether you paid cash for your tuition or you're doing it on student loans, it's still a sunk cost. It was so funny, the year's 2001, and I told my mom, I said, I'm going to quit my job and go to doctoral school and be a professor. She said, a professor of engineering? I said, no, a professor of finance. And she said, but what about all that time, effort, and money you put in to becoming an engineer? By this time, what did I say to her? Mom, that's a sunk cost. I gave a question on an exam. I used to do essay questions in this class, so you guys should feel good that I don't do that anymore. But this person wrote down, they said it was a suck cost. I'm like, yeah, it sucks you spent all that money and now you're not going to be able to use it, right? Okay, so that's a sunk cost. Now, do we include sunk costs in our analysis? No, they're not incremental. They do not change regardless of the decision that we make. So we always leave sunk costs out. This is a really common fallacy you'll see people do using sunk costs. Now, what are the favorite examples that we have in finance of sunk costs? They're the marketing study and the empty warehouse. Let's start with the marketing study. Assume that you own a goat ranch outside of Springfield here, and your goats are very prolific and they create a lot of milk. And right now, you are able to sell a certain amount of milk, but you could sell more if you could just find some way to make goat milk more attractive to the buying public. And so you go out and you hire a marketing person to figure out if people will drink chocolate goat milk. Now, how is the marketing person going to, I usually have a class with marketing people in it to ask them, but how are they going to figure out whether people will drink chocolate goat milk?
Surveys or?
Okay, a survey, we say, hey, what do you think of chocolate goat milk? Why is that probably not a good test?
Most people haven't had it.
Most people have never had it, right? And so what are you going to do? You're going to go out to where the public gathers. Used to, we would have gone to shopping malls. These days, maybe you go to a protest. I don't know. But you sit there and you've got your table with your chocolate goat milk. And you ask people to try it, right? And then you take notes on what people say about it. Now, here's the trick with marketing people. Marketing people are morally flexible. Let me give you an example of their moral flexibility. Marketing people will try to convince 15-year-old boys that Axe body spray will help them get laid. Do any of you actually believe that to be true? No. But the marketing people present that as the truth to 15-year-old boys who don't know any better. So, these people who are willing to lie to 15-year-old boys, do you think they would also be willing to lie to you? Yeah. So if I tell them, I'm going to pay you, by the way, every marketing study I was ever involved with cost $250,000. And that was back in the 90s. Who knows what they're charging these days, but let's just assume it's $250,000. I'm going to pay this marketing person $250,000 to tell me about goat milk. And I tell them, by the way, if the answer is yes, people love goat milk, I'm going to pay you $250,000. And if the answer is no, people don't like goat milk, I'm not going to pay you anything. What answer will I always get from the marketing people?
Yes.
Oh man, kids love that goat milk, can't get enough of it, right? That's why we have to say we're going to pay you either way. So, assuming that they come back and say, no, goat milk sucks, you're never going to sell it with chocolate in it, then we're out $250,000 and we don't even do the NPV analysis. If they say kids love goat milk, should we include that marketing study as a cost in our analysis? No, we're out that money either way. It's a sunk cost. Does that make sense? Okay, the other one that we talk about is the environmental analysis. Let's put you in the biggest regulatory hellhole we have in the United States. It's called California. You're going to be building a convenience store. And it's a place where there's never been a convenience store before. And so you go to figure out what you need to do to get all the approvals necessary. And they say, well, there are these 3 people you need to take a look at this site. First of all, there's an endangered species analyst who will have to come out and figure out if there are any endangered species that are breeding on that plot of land. And if there are they also around, or is it just right there? The second person they say you're going to have to get out there is a hydrologist. And the hydrologist will tell you whether or not the runoff from the gas station, because you guys know people spill gasoline at gas stations all the time. What do you think happens to that gasoline when it rains? It drains off and goes into nearby waterways. So the hydrologist is going to look and see if that water is going to go into any sensitive aquifers or whatnot. And then the third person we're going to have to hire is either an archaeologist or an anthropologist to come and let us know if there are any Native American settlements, burial grounds, anything like that on the location that will have to be archaeologically excavated before we can build our gas station. Now, each one of these people is a professional. Each one of them will expect to be paid for their time regardless of the outcome. And so the first person out there is the endangered species person. And he says, well, we did manage to find a 3-toed sloth on your property. However, the place is surrounded by 3-toed sloths. It's not going to be a big deal. So check the first box, pay $10,000. The second person that comes out is the hydrologist. And the hydrologist looks around and they've got their topographical maps and they tour the whole area and they say, I do not see any sensitive waterways. Check your second box, pay him $10,000. The third person is the archaeologist or anthropologist. They come out, they use some ground penetrating radar, and they do some other stuff, and they don't find any artifacts from ancient civilizations. So tick that box and you pay him $10,000. So now you've paid $30,000 for all those things. If you're now doing an NPV analysis, do you include that $30,000 as part of your initial investment? You say no, why not?
You're already gone.
Yeah, that money is gone. You can't say, well, we decided not to do that project. Please send me my money back. You know, if I've done consulting for someone and they're like, please send me my money back, I'm like, I hang up on them, right? That's how that works. So they're not going to get their money back. So it's a sunk cost. So we don't include them in our analysis. Questions so far? By the way, do you think sunk costs apply to more than just investments? Yeah, so this neighbor girl, she has this boyfriend, and he's a total dork. She's amazing, but he's a total dork. And she says, I'm going to marry, and we'll just call him Dork. I'm going to marry Dork. And I say, why would you do that? And she says, well, I've got 3 years invested in this relationship, and I don't want to waste those 3 years. My wife and I turn to each other and look at each other at exactly the same time and say, sunk cost, right? You can't get those 3 years back regardless. And by the way, if you marry Dork, you're going to be married to Dork for however long until you die or divorce him, right? So you can also see these things in your life with your relationships. Questions? Now we'll talk about opportunity costs. So an opportunity cost is what you could have done if you hadn't done the thing that you're analyzing. So for instance, it's afternoon, you get out of here at 3:15, and Mr. Bardwaj is demonstrating right now that he is sleepy, and he will probably go back to wherever it is that you live, and he'll say, I'd like to take a nap. But then in the back of his head, he's like, what would I do if I didn't take the nap? Well, I could study, I could play golf. Do you golf? Yeah, you look like a golfer. He could play golf, all sorts of things he could do instead of taking that nap. Those things are opportunity costs. So it's the next best use of whatever it is, whether it's time, money, a building. That's the next best thing, is the opportunity cost. And we incur those all the time. Now, when we look at investing in a project, we need to think about whether we are incurring opportunity costs. So, for example, our favorite example of this is the empty warehouse. I have this empty warehouse, and it's just sitting out there, and the insurance is paid up on it, and so nothing is going to change as a result of me moving a manufacturing operation into that warehouse. Do I need to include any cash flows related to that warehouse in my analysis?
So you're already obligated to pay all that, you've already paid it.
Okay, so yeah, that's true. But the question is, what could I do with the building if I don't move the factory into it that I can't do if I didn't move the factory into it? So what could I do if I don't move the factory into the building? What could I do? Mr. Buat?
Rent it out.
You could rent it out. Now, that means that you have to figure out the rent, and, you worry about people not renting it, that they might, after the lease is up, then you might be empty for a while. Instead of doing that, how about this? Let's figure out what we could sell the building for. Let's figure out what we could sell the building for, and our opportunity cost is going to be that amount minus the taxes and transactions fees. And so that's the actual amount of money we could get from selling the building, and that we'd have to pay the taxes and the transaction fees. Now, the next question is this: how do I know how much I could get from selling the building?
Estimates.
Estimates. Who is going to give us the estimate?
Commercial realtor.
A commercial realtor, I love that. So usually the first thing students say is an appraiser. An appraiser is going to charge you money to come out and give you a single estimate. But if you call 3 commercial realtors, you can get similar estimates, and you can get 3 of them instead of just 1, and you haven't had to pay a dime. Let me explain to you how this works. And I'll use my own house as an example. I've sold 3 houses now. And every time I get ready to sell a house, I call 3 realtors. And I say the same thing to each of them. Number 1, I am thinking about selling my house. Have I promised to sell the house? No. Number 2, I am interviewing realtors. Even if I decide to sell the house, does it guarantee that you're going to get the job? No. So I've made it clear that I might not sell the house and that you might not get the job. And then I say, are you interested in making a proposal to represent my house? What do they always say? Yes. Why? Mr. Buat, you look like you have realtors as relatives.
I don't.
You don't?
No.
Oh, wow. Well, that's a compliment. They're good-looking people.
No, commissions.
Commissions! That's how they get paid, right? And so if they're not out there representing properties or leading buyers to properties, they don't get paid. And so, of course, they're going to be interested. So here's how it works. I invite them to come over to my house. They show up at the door. They ring the doorbell. And it's usually a woman with too much perfume and too much jewelry. And she comes in, and we sit down at my kitchen table. And she's got a binder about this thick. And the first third of the binder is all about how freaking great she is. And she talks about how she was a $30 million seller in this year and that year and this year, and how she was given the Realtor of the Year award by the local real estate, whatever. So she'll talk about how freaking great she is. Now, I'm pretty much asleep at this point. But then she starts to say, and now we'll talk about some recent sales in your neighborhood. Recent sales in my neighborhood interest me. Now, by the way, do you think I know what houses have sold in my neighborhood? Yeah. Do you think, being a nosy neighbor, I might have even looked them up to see what they were listed at? Yeah. Do I know what they actually sold for? No. She does, though, because she has access to the MLS, the multiple listing service, and it, on the realtor side, shows the actual sale price. By the way, do listing prices and sale prices always match up? No, hardly ever. Okay, so now she says, well, this one sold for that, this one sold for this one sold for that. And then she'll talk about how these are slightly different from my house. Oh, this one has a swimming pool. Now, you might think that if a house has a swimming pool, it makes it more valuable. Do you think that's the case? No, I've actually known people who had to tear their swimming pool out in order to be able to sell a house. By the way, swimming pools kill more kids than guns in this country. I mean, you always hear about the kids getting shot, but more kids drown in swimming pools than get shot. Pretty sad. Okay, so I don't want my kids to drown. I don't want the neighbors' kids to drown. So I'm not going to buy a house with a swimming pool in the back. And so she'll talk about the other things that may make this house a little better or a little worse than mine. She'll recommend some adjustments, and then she'll come out to a per square foot value for a house like mine. And then she'll say, and that's why we think your house is worth, and then she flips the page, and there it is. That's the number I've been waiting for. By the way, do you think I already had a number in my head? Yeah, I've been doing a little snooping of my own, and so when she says the number, and at the first one that came, the first one, the one that I'm thinking about right now, she was within $500 of what I thought the house was worth, and so it worked out really well. Now, I do this with all three realtors, and I get the following estimates of my home's value. I get $345,000, I get $355,000, and I get $395,000. What do I use as my estimate for the value of my house if I were doing this opportunity cost thing? First of all, let's ask this question. Do you think all of these numbers are reasonable? Do two of them look more alike than another one? Yeah, I'm assuming that the value of my house is in this area right here. Do you think that this realtor also knows the value of my house? Yeah. Why do you think she's throwing out this number?
Their commission, if she gets it.
Yeah, well, and here's the thing. She's going to end up selling it for this price anyway. What's she counting on?
Being the one chosen.
Yeah, and why would I choose her over the other people?
You want more money?
Yeah, so there are two things that are feeding this high price. They're called greed and stupidity. I have to be greedy and I have to be stupid enough to believe that Sharon can get me that extra $40,000. By the way, do you think people are going to pay extra just because your realtor looks nicer or smells better? No, not at all. And so what I would do, I was supposed to say stupidity, what I would do is just average these two numbers right here and assume that the true value of this property is $350,000. And you could do exactly the same thing with commercial realtors. By the way, commercial realty is harder to value than residential. How many houses do you think sell? Dozens and hundreds? How many warehouses do you think sell on a yearly basis? A handful? And so you're going to get these commercial realtors in there, and they're going to come up with these estimates, and you're going to have to make the decision as to what to use. Now, once you get that number, of course, you got to figure out what kind of taxes and transaction costs you're going to have to pay, subtract that out to come up with the opportunity costs that you're going to use in the project to represent that building. Now, one of the assumptions that we make is that all opportunity costs get returned at the end. Why could we make that assumption? Any ideas? Once I have finished this production and I've moved the machinery out of the building, what could I do with it?
Still sell.
Yeah, I can still sell it, right? Now, we make the assumption that we could sell it for the same price that we could have 5 years in the past. When I first started doing this, I had students that said, and by the way, this was 2006, I had students that said, well, wait a minute, Dr. Haggard, real estate always sells for more in the future. And I said, that's not necessarily true. And they're like, oh yeah, it's always true. Real estate always goes up. And then there was the big property crash in 2007, 8, 9. And after that, what do you think students said?
Sells for less.
Yeah, well, it's definitely not going to be worth as much at the end. Now, do I know which one way or the other? No. Best thing I can do is just assume that I can sell it for the same price 5 years from now or whenever the end of the project is that I could today. Let's talk about another example of an opportunity cost. Every factory that I've ever worked in, there's always been a mysterious machine in the corner with a tarp over it. And after I've been there long enough that they're letting me wander around on my own, I always go and sneak a peek under the tarp to see what's hiding there. 6 months later, we're talking about doing some sort of new manufacturing. And I'm like, hey, that broaching machine that we have in the corner could be used to cut the keyways on these shafts for this new project. And they're like, oh yeah. Now, here's the question. do I include an opportunity cost for this machine that has just been sitting in the corner collecting dust? Apply the same logic, right? What could we do with the machine if we don't put it into our production line? Sell it. So then we have to come up with what is our estimated value for this machine. And the way we're going to do that, there are two ways we're going to do that. Number one is the way that we used to do it back before the internet was such a big thing. By the way, I'll tell you how old I am here. In my last year of undergrad, I had a business professor, the only business class I ever took as an undergrad. And he said, "Have you guys heard of this World Wide Web?" And we said, "No." He's like, "That's going to be big." And I'm like, no way. By the way, did you know that WWW stands for World Wide Web? Okay, so I said that, and he's, no way. Okay, so when I get out into the factories, there's still not a well-developed base of websites that talk about used machinery. So back then, what we had to do was call our used machine dealers. You have 3 of them that you deal with. Why do you think I've got 3 used machine dealers I might want to deal with?
Fair prices.
Yeah, so I'm going to call these guys in and have them all give me a quote on the machine. And they all 3 come in, and they may give me the same numbers I've got up here. And I'm going to do, would I do the same thing though? Would I throw out the high one? No, why not?
They're gonna give you the most.
Yeah, they're actually going to give me the money. As opposed to the realtor who's blowing smoke up your skirt and will eventually say, I think, well, we gave it a good try, but we're going to have to lower the price down to $350. This guy's going to write me a check for $395,000. I could take that one to the bank. Does that make sense? And so I'm going to use $395,000 minus any taxes that we're going to incur in that sale. And I'm going to teach you that this true value that we're going to be looking at here would be called an after-tax salvage value. If I take whatever the person's going to pay me and subtract out the tax rate times the difference between the market value and the book value, then that's going to tell me this cash flow that I could have if I sell the machine. Now, we're also going to see that at the end of the project when we sell the machines off from whatever project it is that we're doing. Okay. Now, what if, in order to use this machine in my new production line, I had to spend $5,000 retrofitting it? Should I include that cash flow or not? Yes. Why? It's incremental, right? It's different as a result of taking on the project. If we didn't take on the project, would we still spend that $5,000? Absolutely not. Questions? Now let's talk about side effects. You guys have probably seen these advertisements on TV for prescription drugs, and they show all these people down at the beach flying kites, and they're happy because their blood pressure, diabetes, erectile dysfunction has been cured by this amazing drug. But what always do they mention at the very end of the commercial?
You can die.
Yeah! Side effects include dry mouth, blurry vision, diarrhea, constipation, heart palpitations, and cardiac death. Should you consider the side effects of a drug when deciding whether or not to take that drug? Absolutely. I was reading this article this morning about these THC-infused beverages. Do you guys know what THC is? It's the stuff in marijuana that gets you high. I'm not surprised you knew. He's got his hat on backward. Okay, so it's the stuff in marijuana that gets you high. Well, apparently now it's legal to have that in like seltzer and whatnot. And so people are actually using that as a substitute for alcohol. By the way, alcohol consumption in the United States is down to the lowest level since 1939. And do you think that's because Americans are just doing so much better? They've just They feel so much better they stop drinking? No, it's because legalization of marijuana, right? Okay, now I'm reading along and they're talking about all the benefits of this THC infused stuff. And they say, and unlike beer, it won't make you fat. And I'm like, wow, that's great. You can, relax and not get fat. But then they mention that some of the side effects include, one of them is psychosis, right? By the way, the consumption of marijuana has been linked to psychosis, especially in males 18 to 25 years old. Raise your hand if you're a male between, yeah. Are you older than 25? Smoke up. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. No, I'm kidding. Okay. So, it's very important that we think about these side effects. Now, when we've got these projects going, we're always focused on what benefit the project's going to bring us. But there are also financial side effects to taking on these projects. And there are two kinds of side effects. There are good ones, things that will bring us extra money as a result, and things that will hurt us as a result. So let's talk about those. The first kind that we talk about is called synergy. And that is when taking on a new project actually increases the cash flows in another one of our projects. I'll give an example. When the Apple Watch came out, some people were angry. They said that Apple Watch only works with the Apple iPhone. So the Android people were a little bit chafed. But then after the second generation of the Apple Watch came around, enough people were like, you know what, I want to give that a try anyway. So what happened to sales of iPhones as a result of the introduction of the Apple Watch? Yeah, they actually went up. And so those incremental extra sales of iPhones should also be considered when we're doing the Apple Watch project. Now, you could also look at some of Apple's other projects or products. For instance, the original iPad. You guys know what size a regular iPad is. It comes out, and of course, I never buy the first thing of anything Apple sells. I always get the second. And so I got the second generation iPad, and I made the mistake of taking it to my parents' house where my mother picked it up and looked at it. And she said, wow, that would be great for me to look at Facebook and play Words with Friends. By the way, this is about August. What do you think I'm thinking now? What have I got to get my mom for Christmas? iPad. Now, here's the fun thing. In September of that year, Apple came out with the iPad Mini. The regular iPad was $500. The iPad Mini was only $350. What do you think Mom got for Christmas? The iPad Mini. And of course I justified it to myself. I'm like, oh, with her old hands, it'll be easier for her to hold. Fast forward 3 years when she sees my wife's full-size iPad versus her Mini. She's like, oh yeah, this is so much better. So what do you think Mom got for that Christmas? Yeah, she got the full-size iPad. Anyway, so it saved me some money in the short term, cost me in the long term. I should have just got her the big one to begin with. Back to the story. When they introduced the iPad Mini, not only did they have to think about the new sales that they would get from the people who would like an iPad but couldn't afford to spend $500, they have to worry about the sales that they've lost. And the sales that we've lost, we would call it either erosion or cannibalism. Anybody here ever been to the Grand Canyon? Oh, good. I'm glad you haven't wasted your time. It's just a big freaking hole. Okay, now the question though is this: how did the Grand Canyon get formed? Erosion. It's the action of wind and water on rocks and soil. That's what eroded away the walls of that canyon and made it as big as it is today. If we have a project that is going to wear away the cash flows of other existing projects, we say that that is erosion. It's eroding the cash flows of that other project. The other term that we use to describe this is called cannibalism. What is cannibalism?
Consuming something of the same kind.
Yeah, consuming something of the same kind. Usually students go to the human example, but it doesn't have to be human. For example, did you guys know that chickens are cannibals? Oh yeah, chickens will, if you see a sick chicken, the other chickens will peck it to death. They're vicious, and then they'll eat its carcass. So that's why when I go to Chick-fil-A, I never feel bad, because the chicken is an evil creature with a dark heart, so, and they're delicious, right? Okay, so that's cannibalism. If our new project is eating away sales from old projects, we call that cannibalism. The iPad mini eats away at sales of the regular iPad. So we have to consider that. Now, just because a project has cannibalistic impacts, should we avoid doing it? No, and here's why. If we don't cannibalize our sales, who will? Yeah, competitor. So I worked in a trailer suspension, at a trailer suspension company. And so this is building the trailers that go underneath, big trucks that you see out on the highway. And we had our old standby that cost about $300 to $400 to manufacture. And it was easy to manufacture, and the equipment was, everything was proven, it was beautiful. But it was heavy. And every pound that you haul down the highway in suspension is a pound of cargo that you can't carry. Does that make sense? Have you guys seen these weigh stations at the side of the highway? Do you think the weigh station says, oh, but it's okay because most of that's suspension? No, they don't care. And so for two reasons, we wanted to lighten the suspension up. Number one is it increases the amount of cargo people can carry. And number two, it reduces the amount of diesel the truck consumes when it's empty. Does that make sense? Actually, it reduces the amount it consumes all the time. And so we wanted to come up with a new lightweight suspension. And so the engineers went crazy. And they came up with this. It's hard to call a suspension sexy, but this thing was drop dead sexy. It had curves like a 1930s aeroplane. It was beautiful. I'm like, wow, that's cool. And they told us how much the weight decrease was. Keep in mind, I'm on the manufacturing side of this, not the engineering. And I said, well, so what are the weight savings? They told us. I'm like, wow, that's freaking great. And then it came to us to figure out how much this thing was going to cost to manufacture. Remember I told you it cost $300 to $400 to make the old ones? This thing was going to cost us $2,000 to make. We could probably sell it for $2,500. But the profit wasn't going to be as good as it was on the old suspension. Should we do the new suspension, or should we stick with the old one? By the way, the answer is different if you're a monopoly. If you're a monopoly, the answer is stick with the old one, right? But if you're competing, as we were, then you have to go ahead and go with the new one, because if you don't, your competitor will, and they'll take away the business. By the way, do you think we got rid of the old one altogether? No. In fact, it turned out that it was better for places with bad roads, like northern Canada, Australia, and developing countries. And so we kept that one alongside the new one. Okay, any questions about synergy or erosion and cannibalism? Should we include these cash flows in our analysis? Absolutely. They're incremental. They're changing as a result of taking on this project. Therefore, we need to include them. Okay, now let's go ahead and first of all, let's walk through all these formulas, because this is basically the path we're going to be taking. We are going to be building up to these three cash flows so we can calculate our cash flow from assets. What do you think OCF stands for?
Operating cash flow.
Operating cash flow. And then we're going to subtract out our net capital spending. Why are we subtracting out capital spending? Because it's money flowing out. Positive spending is a negative cash flow from assets perspective. And then we are going to subtract, by the way, what's the triangle mean?
Change.
Change is the Greek letter delta, it means change. NWC, what's NWC mean? Net working capital. And we're going to, if we have to make an investment in net working capital, of course we need to subtract that out too. Now, one of the things that we also assume, we've already talked about the opportunity cost, but we also assume that net working capital returns to zero at the end of the project. And so that's something that we'll have to watch at the end, which by the way means the change in net working capital is actually going to be negative at the end. And what's a negative times a negative? Positive. So it's going to increase our last cash flow. Operating cash flow is equal to EBIT. What is EBIT?
Earnings before interest and taxes.
Earnings before interest and taxes. And then we're going to add back depreciation. Why do you think we're adding back depreciation?
Not a real cash.
It's not a real cash flow. Remember, this is operating cash flow that we're calculating. So we're going to have to add that back. It's already been subtracted out of this thing. It's already been subtracted out. Now, then we subtract taxes. Are taxes a real cash flow? Yeah, if you pay them, you know they are, right? They are a real cash flow. Now, I want you to think about this. It's earnings before interest and taxes, and then we're subtracting taxes. Why are we not concerned about interest? Do we ever include a cash flow for interest in a capital budgeting project? No, very good. I could see you're not confident enough to answer why we don't. So I'm going to go with someone else. Mr. Bardwash, how do we account for the financing costs of the project? Mr. Rowland. Is it Roland or Rollins?
Rollins.
Rollins, okay, so you're a plural. Okay, so how are we going to account for the financing costs of the project?
It's a great question, but I don't know the answers.
Oh, man. Mr. Volker.
I'm on B2.
You're a relative of Paul Volcker, the great economist. You should, yeah. Mr. Huang, any idea? No. Okay. What was chapter 12 all about?
Your discount rate.
Yeah, the discount rate. It's figuring out what the discount rate for the project is. That's how we're accounting for the financing costs of the project. Let me say that again. The discount rate is how we account for the financing costs of the project. Now, don't get confused and think that flotation costs are involved in that. They're not. But we're talking about that annual percentage number. That's taking care of our interest and dividends. We don't have to worry about either one of those things because we are accounting for them through the discount rate. So I'm going to say this one more time. Never include an interest cash flow or a dividend cash flow, if you were so crazy, in your capital budgeting projects because we account for financing costs through the discount rate. Okay. Now, net working capital is equal to CA minus CL. What's CA? Current assets. And what is CL? Current liabilities. What kinds of things would we see in current assets?
Cash.
Cash and what?
Equipment.
Oh, I think maybe you're thinking about longer term assets.
Accounts receivable.
Yeah, cash, accounts receivable. Remember that current assets are anything we expect to produce cash within a year. And so we've got cash, we've got accounts receivable, anything else? Inventory, very good. So those are the big three for current assets. When we talk about current liabilities, what are we usually talking about? What's the big one?
Accounts payable.
Yeah, accounts payable. Yeah, short, so if I've got debt that's coming due in less than a year, that's going to be in there. But for the purposes of our projects, most of the time, it's going to be accounts payable. Ooh, We've already discussed the after-tax salvage value. By the way, the market value, that's the amount I could get if I went ahead and just sold the machine. That's what MV is, market value. And the book value here, by the way, what does T stand for?
Tax.
Tax rate. And the book value is historical cost minus accumulated depreciation is the conventional definition. But what I like to do is say it's equal to the previous year's book value minus the current year's depreciation. And the reason I prefer to do it this way is when we're doing it in a spreadsheet, I can just drag that puppy right across. I don't have to calculate accumulated depreciation. By the way, does accumulated depreciation do us any good for anything else? No. And so why go to the trouble of creating another row to calculate that when we could just do this? Is it possible for the ATSV to be greater than the market value? What if the book value is greater than the market value? What's going to be the sign on this thing right here? It's going to be negative. What's a negative times a negative? Positive. So when I add this up to market value, ATSV is going to be greater than market value. Now, is that the most common outcome? No. Does it actually happen? Yes. I'll give you two situations. Number one, I worked in a factory in Duncan, Oklahoma, where we were machining magnesium. If you don't know about magnesium, it's the stuff in fireworks that makes those bright sparkly things. Burns very hot. And when you are working with magnesium, you always have to have a bucket of sand nearby. And the reason is magnesium has a tendency to catch fire. And when it starts burning, it burns so hot that you cannot put out the flames with a fire extinguisher or with a water and a hose, right? You just can't. It just doesn't work. So one night, one of our guys, he gets the shop packet and he's looking at it and it says, step number 1, get a freaking bucket of sand. What's the sand for? If things catch fire on the machine, he's going to smother that fire with the sand. Got to get the oxygen away from it. That's the only way to stop the fire. And so he's like, I've been working with this stuff for a while. It's never caught fire. I don't want to get the sand. And so he starts working on the project, and sure enough, the darn thing catches fire, and it burns so hot, it burns, it was a lathe, it burns the lathe to the ground. Just ashes. The book value on that machine could have still been positive, but what was the market value? Zero. And in that case, the after-tax salvage value would have actually been greater than the market value. Now, the second one that we'll talk about is obsolete machinery. So if you guys are computer nerds of any stripe, you know that when they make those chips, they have to print these little lines to do the circuits. And the width of those lines, the thinner they are, the more stuff you can get on a chip, and the less power the chip consumes. So ideally, you want those things to be as thin as you possibly can get them. And so there is a company in the Netherlands that is continually making new machines that makes those lines smaller, smaller, smaller. Now, when I go out and invest in some chip making equipment, the IRS will undoubtedly tell me that it's got a 5 or 7 or 10-year depreciation on it. However, that machinery is obsolete after 2 years. And so in that case, I could probably end up with a market value of the machinery that is less than the book value because I haven't been able to depreciate the machine out as fast as the value has fallen. Does that make sense? Okay. And I think I've talked about all that other stuff. So I'm going to hand out the Baldwin Company example. I want you guys to hold on to this and bring it back next time because undoubtedly we will not get finished this time. I think everybody showed up today. Take one, pass me that, please. So we're going to do an Excel spreadsheet. And the first thing I'm going to do is make this bigger so you guys can see it. And as we go through here and we run into numbers, we are going to figure out what to do with them on the spreadsheet. The Baldwin Company, originally established in 1965 to make footballs, is now a leading producer of tennis balls, baseballs, in other words, all sorts of balls. And so they are interested in expanding to another segment of the sports ball market, and the market is for brightly colored bowling balls. Do you guys all know what bowling is? Where you go, and back in the 80s, that was considered a safe place to take a girl on a date, and except for you had to wear someone else's shoes, which I always hated. Okay, so that's the market we're talking about. Now, these days, and this example is getting a little stale, but back then when I was in that business, bowling balls were, for the most part, drab colors. They were black, gray. They didn't have a lot of style and finesse. And so that's why they're saying, well, wait a minute, maybe these brightly colored bowling balls could be a market we could jump into. He also believed it would be difficult for competitors to take advantage of the opportunity because of Baldwin's cost advantages and highly developed marketing skills. So in 2022, they investigated the marketing potential of brightly colored bowling balls. Now, they do this in a way I would not recommend. You can tell that this was written by a finance person because they say they send out 3 questionnaires to people to ask about brightly colored bowling balls. I don't think that's the way marketing people would do it. How would marketing people do it?
Go to the bowling alley.
You go to the bowling alley, and when you get there, what do? Show them your balls. Oh, come on, people, get your minds out of the gutter. Oh, 2 lame bowling jokes in the same lecture. That's got to be a world record. Okay, so, yeah, you're going to go down to the bowling alley, and you're going to show these. By the way, have you ever seen stuff and you didn't realize that you needed it or wanted it until you saw it? And you're like, oh, I gotta have that. By the way, when you have that instinct, walk away, take a breath, and if you still feel the same way the next day, maybe buy it, right? Does that make sense? I've got closets full of crap that was like, oh, I gotta have one of those. And then you get home and you're like, what am I gonna do with that? Okay, so it says they could achieve a 10 to 15% share of the market. Of course, some people at Baldwin complained about the cost of the test marketing, which was $250,000. Remember, I told you every marketing study I've ever interacted with, $250,000. Now, I'm going to go ahead and put this in here. Marketing study, and it's $250,000. What kind of cost is that? Yeah, it's a sunk cost. Do we include it or not? Nope. Okay. In any case, the Baldwin Company is now considering investing in a machine to produce bowling balls. The bowling balls would be manufactured in a building owned by the firm and located near Los Angeles. This building, which is vacant, and the land can be sold for $150,000 after taxes. Is that right? 150,000?
Yes.
What kind of cost is that?
Opportunity.
Yeah, it's an opportunity cost. Working with his staff, they're preparing an analysis. He summarizes his assumptions as follows. The cost of the bowling ball machine is $100,000. What year are we going to get the bowling ball machine? 0. And I don't even have to tell you that we're going to include that one, do I? Okay. The machine has an estimated market value at the end of 5 years of $30,000. Do you recognize that that's the market value of time 5? Okay. Now they start to get into production by year. And at this point, instead of putting things up here in the corner, I'm going to go ahead and start doing things by year. Now let's talk about why I put the stuff in the corner. I am going to link to that stuff down below. And that way, if something changes, by the way, do you think numbers change as you work on one of these projects? Absolutely. As numbers change, I can go back and I could just change one cell and it changes everything else. That's why the spreadsheet is called a what-if machine. What if the bowling ball machine actually costs us $125,000? All I have to do is go up there and change one number and it changes my depreciation, my after-tax salvage value, changes everything that is touched by that. And so it makes a lot of sense to set it up this way. Unfortunately, when we get to the years, things get a little hairy and bless you. We can't quite do that. Okay, so let's go ahead. By the way, what is the first year of the project? Kind of a tricky question. What's the first year of the project? Is it year 1? It's what?
2022.
No, 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 no.
Okay.
0?
Yeah, 0. And they tell us that this is a 5-year project. Have I lost anybody so far? Okay. They tell us the production by year. And this is in balls. How many balls do you think we produce at time 0? 0. And so these numbers that they give us start at year 1. They are 5,000, 8,000, 12,000, 10,000, and 6,000. And so they're expecting a big ramp, and then they're expecting it to tail off. Let's see what else we've got here. The price of bowling balls in the first year will be $20. Bowling ball price year 1 is $20. The bowling ball market is highly competitive, so Meadows believes the price of bowling balls will only increase at 2% per year. Okay, now what else do we know? Conversely, it gives us an inflation rate. We do not know whether we're going to need that inflation yet or not. And so, all the way, I'm just getting my format here to be the same. I'm going to go ahead and include it. If I don't need it, it doesn't hurt anything, but if I do need it, we can always reach back and grab it. And then they tell us that the first year production costs will be $10 per unit, but the production cash outflows are expected to grow at 10% per year. And why is that? because the plastic to produce bowling balls is increasing in price at faster than the rate of inflation. So we've got bowling ball price, cost. Year one, and it's $10. By the way, if I do something up here that looks like magic to you, let me know and I'll go over it. Okay, bowling ball cost growth is 10%. Okay. The next thing we're going to start talking about is net working capital. But we've only got a couple of minutes here, so let's talk generally why net working capital goes up at the beginning of a project and then goes away at the end. At the beginning of the project, do you think you're going to need some cash? Yeah. Do you think you're going to need raw materials? Yeah. And so cash, raw materials is going to go up. And then also, what about your accounts receivable? We're hoping to sell these bowling balls, so we're going to generate accounts receivable. And so cash, accounts receivable, inventory is going to go up. Inventory, not just the raw materials, but the finished goods is going to go up. And so we see the current assets going up. We also see, though, the accounts payable going up. When I go out and buy the plastic from the suppliers, my accounts payable is going to go up. And so all of the increases in current asset is going to increase my net working capital. The increase in my current liability would actually push it down. Here's what I can tell you. In any company that has a healthy business model, assuming that payment terms are the same between your customers and your suppliers, your accounts receivable should always be higher than your accounts payable. And here's why. Your accounts receivable is sales of finished goods. Should the finished good sell for more than the raw material cost? Absolutely. And so that's why we see, even though current liabilities is going up, we still expect the net working capital to go up at the beginning of the project. And at the end, I take all of the remaining raw material, I throw it in the machine, I shoot out these bowling balls. I sell those bowling balls for accounts receivable, which then I collect, and I've got all this cash. I pay off the accounts payable, and now I've got this big old wad of cash. Do you think the mothership company, the Baldwin Company, is going to allow us to keep that money for a party? No. It's got to go back to the company. And so that's why we see net working capital going down at the end to zero. And so that last change in net working capital is going to be negative. And a negative times a negative means it's going to increase that last cash flow as we give back that net working capital to the mothership. Are there any questions?